Thank you, Mr. President. It's not Christmas, but I do want to ask, have you seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Anybody? Every 8 p.m. Christmas Eve on NBC. NBC didn't pay me to say that. That was a childhood tradition of mine. Growing up in East Cobb counties, we'd watch It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas Eve in my household. It's a story of George Bailey, a guy whose family owns a humble business, the Bailey Building and Loan. And y'all know what a building and loan is. Building and loan is sort of like a credit union. It's a financial institution, not a bank, that can take investments from ordinary folks and then offer loans to build houses, small single-family homes that are modest but quality, affordable, and then the money becomes equity, right? That everybody's got equity in each other's homes. And so it's a pro-social community way to build the opportunity for affordable home ownership in Bedford Falls, which is the name of the fictitious town where It's a Wonderful Life takes place. And I won't, comprehensively recite the plot of It's a Wonderful Life, but suffice it to say that George Bailey, the protagonist, faces a crunch. He faces an economic crisis in the community of Bedford Falls. It's around the wartime, right? It's like World War II era. It came out, I think it's Frank Capra, right? It came out in the 1940s. And he has to reassure investors in the building and loan that they need to keep their money in the building and loan, even though there's a crunch, because it's critical to affordable housing in the community of Bedford Falls. And every good story needs an antagonist. And the antagonist in It's a Wonderful Life is a robber baron named Henry F. Potter. But he's Mr. Potter. And Mr. Potter in that film is synonymous with greed, synonymous with capitalist exploitation. Any window of opportunity he sees to extract wealth and value for himself, he will take it. And granted, it's a bit of a caricature, kind of a reductive look at one man, but he's meant to symbolize some very powerful forces in society who seek at every opportunity to make a buck. And if they can make a buck off the little guy, the low-income guy, that's what they're going to do. And we all know that those folks are out there. The author of this legislation is the leading fundraiser for the office of Lieutenant Governor of Georgia on the Republican side. He's got over $2 million in the bank. And I would humbly submit to you that the people that he is talking to today and trying to sell this bill to, lower income, working families, are not the folks filling up that bank account with $2 million. Follow the money. The people who want this bill are the people who own car dealerships. They're the people who own big businesses throughout the state, who are expecting Republican government to persist in 2027 and are making sure to fund that outcome and make sure that that happens. And I want to talk about a scene from It's a Wonderful Life that reminds me a lot. This debate reminds me a lot of. There's an economic crisis in the town of Bedford Falls. So what happens? The bank starts to fail. Mr. Potter, who owns most of the businesses in town already, takes over the bank. And when he takes over the bank, he starts calling loans. And he calls the loan for the building and loan. And they have a little mishap. It's a little plot device where they misplace some money, but the building and loan is underwater. They're in trouble. So what happens? All of those investors who own their quality, affordable, smaller homes, but dignified homes in Bedford Falls, run to the office of the building and loan, and they demand their money out of the building and loan. Why? Because they can't get money out of the bank. There's been a run on the bank. So they need their money, and they need it now. And you hear several of the townspeople in Bedford Falls say, I got bills to pay. I can't make it till next week. I can't make it till next month. And George Bailey is faced with the prospect that all of a sudden, just like there was a run on the bank, all of the people who need their money and need it now are going to bankrupt the building and loan. Because if everybody in Bedford Falls asked for all their money back immediately, the building and loan would not have enough money to cover its liabilities, and the building and loan would go under. Well, there's also a scene prior to that in the movie where Mr. Potter is working with one of his associates, one of the guys who works for the machine, and they're looking at Bailey Park, which is all of the beautiful small homes that the townspeople in Bedford Falls own because of George Bailey, the underdog, the protagonist of the film. And the associate says to Mr. Potter, it's like a back room with the cigars, right? They're planning their economic domination. And the associate says to Mr. Potter, look at this Bailey Park with these sprawling, beautiful homes that are affordable to the everyman, to the average Joe. It's a problem. That park is a problem because that's land that we don't own. That's housing that we're not charging rent for, that we're not making money off of. It's something in Bedford Falls that we don't have our hands on. So when there's a run on the building and loan, and all the people come to get their money back, George Bailey has to give, it's one of those inspired speeches, right? It's like the wartime speech where he's got to reassure all the people in the community that they can't cut and run. They can't just give up now. And I would do a Jimmy Stewart impression, but the well's too dignified for that. But he says, Tom, Randall, now wait, listen to me. I beg of you not to do this thing. If Potter gets hold of the building and loan, there will never be another decent house built in this town. He's already got charge of the bank. He's got the bus line. He's got the department stores, and now he's after us. Why? Well, it's very simple, because we're cutting in on his business. That's why, and because he wants to keep you living in his slums and paying the kind of rent that he decides. Joe, you lived in one of his houses, didn't you? Well, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what he charged you for that broken down shack? Here, Ed, you remember things, last year when things weren't going so well, you couldn't make your payments. You didn't lose your house, did you? Do you think Potter would have let you keep it? Can't you understand what's happening here? Don't you see what's happening? Potter isn't selling, Potter is buying. And why? Because we're panicking and he's not. That's why. He's picking up some bargains. Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other. Now, the reason he had to give that speech is because the move that Potter made in this window of opportunity, and I promise I'll get to my point, is that Potter tried to buy all of the shares of the building and loan for 50 cents on the dollar. 50 cents on the dollar. He said, you can get your money from me today, but you got to give me your shares in the building and loan. I'll give you half of what they're worth. So some of the townspeople who need that money, they're ready to go. They're ready to sell their shares in the building and loan on the cheap for 50 cents because that's money today. Folks, this debate is bigger than this one bill. I actually think that the senator from the 19th is a talented politician. I think he's one of the most talented politicians in this building. And I think he's put together a compelling narrative package for the people of Georgia to run on this year in 2026. And that narrative is, we worry about affordability. We got an affordability crisis. Well, what's the fastest way I can give you your money back? Other than to slash the state income tax. And make no mistake, you hear a lot from the well today about, well, this bill doesn't have that. This bill doesn't say this bill doesn't say that. We've been looking at months of headlines that this chamber, the Senate Republican leadership, wants to eliminate the state income tax entirely. That's half the state budget. They want to get rid of it. Now, I'm not a math major, and I know most of Georgia's not a math major, but something's got to give. If you're going to eliminate half the state budget over time, now they'll come up and say, that's not in the bill, that's not in the bill. But if you eliminate half the state budget, you got to replace it with something. That's just simple logic. That's basic common sense. Otherwise, we're going to cut all the services that we do have. And let me submit to you that when Potter says, I'm going to take your shares for 50 cents on the dollar, Potter is not saying, and I'm going to build you a bunch of slums and raise your affordable housing and put you in slums where the water doesn't heat and the appliances break and you never get maintenance. He doesn't say that. If Senate Republicans were representing Mr. Potter in court, they would be saying right now, well, that's not in the bill. Mr. Potter never said he was going to put you in a slum. All he said is he wants to buy your shares for 50 cents. That's all he said. So don't act like he wants to do anything else. But what does Potter really want? Well, the movie tells us. Because when George Bailey lives an alternate reality, right, he's contemplating ending it all because he's so depressed. And an angel shows George Bailey what life would be like if it weren't for George Bailey. If it weren't for George Bailey, what would the name of Bedford Falls be? Anybody remember? Pottersville. Where he doesn't just own most of the town, he owns all the towns. And it's not the cute, crafty, small arts and crafts storefronts on the main street. It's strip clubs and bars and nightlife and vices and anything, Trumpy, right, that's flashy and gets attention and is made of gold. Entertainment and cheap thrills is what Pottersville turns into because the building and loan collapses in that world. State government isn't that sexy. State government is something that Grover Norquist wants to drown in a bathtub, famously. But what is state government? State government is affordable housing. It's us working together to solve our problems. And this bill does cut the low-income housing tax credit, a credit that enabled 60 projects last year for thousands and thousands of units of affordable housing. It's your public schools. State government is making sure that we've got top-paid teachers in the classroom attracting good talent so that we can learn innovation, like some of our schools are trying out, but most of our schools deserve access to, is innovation that can help our students learn not just basic literacy, but let's compete with China, right? But where is our state government now? Our state government is, and I got to commend the senator from the 4th, he does amazing work on literacy. But why are we 20 years behind on it? Why are we 20 years behind on something we should be getting right? We should have been getting right from the 90s until now. Why is it that when I go to retirement committee, we're constantly having conversations about how to fudge the pension numbers so that police officers and teachers can get the promise of some kind of payment on the back end so that they can stay in their jobs? Because we have a retention crisis, because we're losing state employees. What about our prisons, where the walls are crumbling and people can break a piece off the wall and make a shank, or the locks don't work on the doors, so we got to put master locks on, which is a fire hazard. Otherwise, people get murdered in cells, and the GDC is having a hard time keeping up with even who's where and what cells when murders happen, and they don't know who to put the finger on because the guards aren't saying anything about it. What about behavioral health and the fact that we don't have enough beds for people in mental health crisis? The list goes on and on. State government in Georgia is our building and loan. State government is our cooperation with one another to try to solve the most pressing problems we've got. So when I hear voices up here today saying, Republicans are for affordability, Republicans are the underdog, imagine Mr. Potter pretending to be the underdog. Imagine Mr. Potter saying, I'm for the little guy. That's why I'm offering you 50 cents a share on your shares in the building and loan. Mr. Potter's not for the little guy, and Georgians are smarter than this. I mean, one of the most cynical things about this debate is that, the Republican Party in this debate is very smug because you think that you have a stranglehold on how politics works. You think tax cuts are easy money politically, that this is going to do shock and awe politically for your base. And how could you vote against this? I've heard that from several members. How could you vote against giving money back to people? Imagine being in the room at the building and loan. How could you vote against giving these people 50 cents on the dollar today? Why? Because that might be today, but next week, next month, their affordable homes go away. Next year, the slums get built in their place. And for the 10 to 20 years after that, people are struggling even more to get by in the slums that follow when we cut off our most basic services. Georgia is in the bottom 20% nationally for per capita government investment. Georgia is in the bottom 20% nationally for median income. You heard the minority leader that we're 8th to last on metrics where we shouldn't be. It's the opposite because we're the 8th most populous state. We're a big state with over 11 million people. We have a lot of needs. But in Pottersville, in that alternate reality where Potter owns everything, people are defeated. That's why Potter gets away with it, because what do the people in Pottersville believe about their lives? This is as good as it gets. It can't be better than this. There's no vision for how we could work together. Of course, there's a bunch of bars and strip clubs on the main street. Of course, there's no access to affordable housing because that's just the breaks. That's just what life is like. And in Georgia, the analogy is easy. When there's not an OBGYN in a significant percentage of Georgia counties, when you have to drive 60 minutes for emergency care because there's no primary or specialty care doctor in your district, a lot of the attitudes of Republican electeds and people who have been taught helplessness, who have learned helplessness because their state government is not proactive in meeting these needs, they have been taught to believe that that's just the way that it is. But what about the minority whip? Remember her speech about the child tax credit. We had one federally that cut child poverty in half. It would cost the same amount of money that we're spending on this. We could do a child tax credit for $6 to $9 billion, depending on how you want to do it, and you would cut child poverty in half, and then what? Those kids can afford for their parents not to have to work 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs. Those parents can send their kids to get a quality education. Those kids don't have to worry about working themselves to facilitate the family's finances. Those kids have more educational and work opportunities because they've left the poverty trap. What about an earned income tax credit? What about all the ways that we could be investing in working families, but the majority, speaking on behalf of Mr. Potter, wants you to believe that that stuff's just not possible. It's not realistic. For $700 million, we could fund the entire enhanced subsidy program that we lost federally up to 400% of the poverty line. And all we have to do is raise premium taxes on insurance companies making profits in the billions with a B, and raise our cigarette tax just a little bit to the national average, and we'd be able to pay for those health care subsidies. But what are we doing? We're cutting the state budget by $6 to $9 billion. And it's a little too on the nose, the Potter analogy, folks, because Mr. Potter said, I'll give you 50 cents on the dollar, and the appropriations chairman is doing 50% of the math. He's saying this only costs $3 billion. Folks, he's just counting from July 1st to December 31st. That's how the fiscal year works. Georgians are smarter than that. They know that 6 months is half the year. And when you do this program in 2027, it costs $6 billion for the whole year, not $3 billion for half the year. And then if you add in the tax rate cut that's coming in the other bill, that's another $3 billion, making the total cost $9 billion per year. Bailey Building Loan in Bedford Falls, that's the last thing that community's got. They're hanging on by a thread, and I humbly submit to you, colleagues, that so are we. Georgia is hanging on by a thread, and no amount of keep chopping and no amount of this magazine that, is funded by somebody familiar to us says we're the #1 state to do business for the 957th year in a row. None of that is going to cover up for the fact that this state is hanging on, and the affordability crisis we're talking about is not solved by a senseless tax cut that Brian Kemp's going to veto on site. On site, he's going to veto that. This is election year stuff. So last thing I'll say is this. I'm glad the senator from the 27th brought up history. Do y'all know why the income tax was created in 1929? What was going on then? The robber barons had been dominating the economy and politics for decades by the time that 1929 rolled around. And nationally, the income tax, the federal one was enacted a few years before, was a response to runaway wealth concentrated in the hands of a few billionaire tycoons who ran everything. Another interesting backdrop to that period of time historically was the existence of tariffs. Why? Because the Industrial Revolution was happening, right? Post-Civil War industry in the United States, tariffs were in place to protect those industries, and those tariffs were cost increases on working people. So the political era that produced the income tax, that created the income tax, had billionaire robber barons running away with their wealth, and it had tariffs that were increasing costs for the working class. Now that sounds awfully familiar. So if y'all are saying stuff like, oh, you're going to be in the minority for another 10 years, you don't have the pulse, people want their money back, when they invented the income tax and said, yes, we want to be taxed because we want the people on the top end of the income spectrum to pay their fair share, that all happened in circumstances politically that were identical to the circumstances we're going through now. So it may be true that ever since Reagan, y'all have been riding your sports cars down the political main street with the windows down, talking about tax cuts as the answer to everything. That is not where the voters are, folks, because the voters are too smart for this play. The voters know that even if we vote no on this and we don't do this particular type of income tax slashing, they know you can tax the people who are the top earners. They know that we have the tools to go make the wealthy pay their fair share. But you know why the wealthy have not paid their fair share yet? There's a scene in It's a Wonderful Life. You'll be shocked that there's one more scene where Mr. Potter tries to buy off George Bailey. He invites George Bailey into his office and he says, George, I want to put you in charge of my business. I'm going to pay you $20,000 a year. Again, pretty on the nose, right? And he says, you wouldn't mind going to the nicest restaurants in town, going to Europe for vacation every now and then? And George Bailey thinks about it. He goes, would I? He has to think about it because it would benefit, it would completely revolutionize his family's life if Mr. Potter bought him off. But then he remembers that's not what the underdog would do. The underdog would fight for the community, would fight for that affordable housing that his family helped create. And he tells Mr. Potter, no, I'm not going to take that deal. If Georgians are listening to this, they need to know that they are being bought off and the price is very cheap. We're going to throw you $100 a month for a lot of y'all. And by throwing you $100 a month, we hope that you ignore that your public schools, the environment, your roads, your health care, everything's going to deteriorate. And in the meantime, the top 20% are getting $20,000 back a year. So Georgians, the choice is yours. Do you want to get paid off so that the rich who aren't paying their fair share get even more money back? Or do you want to believe in a better world that takes a little bit of community and a little bit of teamwork to figure out? With that, Mr. President, I will yield for questions.
Senator from the 8th, what purpose do you rise?
I have a question.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the gentleman yield?
I do, to my good friend.
And you are my good friend. I have a quick question, though. You were saying that the tariffs of the 1930s and 20s were to protect American industries. Was that correct?
I believe that that was the intention, but one side effect of tariffs, you might protect industry, but it's at a very significant cost, which is that ordinary folks paying for consumer goods, cost of everything goes up with tariffs. Inputs go up, the cost, the ultimate cost, the person pays at the cash register goes up. So, protection means something specific. It means you protect something that already exists. One of the reasons the tariffs now are so senseless is because, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump say, oh, well, we're going to create new industries with these tariffs. That takes a really long time, and it doesn't necessarily happen. So these tariffs have real costs, and you don't always get the benefit of them.
So, does the gentleman further yield?
I do.
I just want to ask, have you ever thought about if we had not have protected those industries, what we would have done during World War II when those industries became the arsenal for democracy?
I think, I've never come out and said, oh, all tariffs are bad. Like, I'll give you a good example. Candle makers. I've talked to labor on the coast, and, candle makers have some real capacity issues where we need to make sure that industry, which is a fledgling industry and has, certain vulnerabilities in the international market, has a little bit of help. Again, protecting industries that already exist. And I think it matters to the context of the national environment. When you have tariffs in the context of a world war effort where the whole country comes together and works as one with one purpose, it does a lot more. I mean, I've got an NRA poster in my office, not the NRA you're thinking of. National Recovery Act. And what was that? National Recovery Act was federal legislation that was designed during wartime to help everybody get on the same page about pitching in. We might go through a crunch. Prices might be slightly higher for a second, but we're all in this together. That is not the tariffs that we're getting right now. The tariffs we're getting right now are because Donald Trump gets mad at a world leader. They have a bad meeting with him. They don't call him yes, sir, no, sir, Mr. President the right way. And then he goes and slaps some arbitrary number on him. And he's doing such a bad job of that, the GOP in the Senate, we had several senators that just voted, the U.S. Senate, to limit the tariffs he's put on Canada, one of our biggest trading partners. So, it's context, man. And during World War II, when we're all on the same page and we're one national culture, that's very different from the way that Trump is arbitrarily throwing around tariffs right now.
Thank you, Senator. I'll just add that I think that this country has to make sure that we have the industrial capacity to produce the means and munitions to defend itself. And I just want to say that. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Any further?
Further questions, Senator. Recognize Senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield for a series of questions?
I do yield for as many questions as you'd like.
Thank you. First question, would you agree with me that Senate Bill 476 does eliminate the income tax on individuals making $50,000 or less?
By the terms of it, that's what it does.
No more questions.
Okay.
Does the Senator yield for more questions, or?
Yeah, I'll yield for a couple more.
Chair recognizes the Senator from the 2nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield?
To my good friend from Savannah, I do.
Senator, is it not true that individuals will not receive this $5,000 increase that's being permitted in the chamber because this is not a zero-sum game? We already have a standard deduction of $24,000, so therefore moving that standard deduction from $24,000 to $100,000 will be a net gain, more realistic, around $2,000 to $3,000. Is that not true?
And that's in the best case scenario, Senator. I mean, we haven't even talked, some of us today have talked about seniors, the fact that they already get significant income tax relief. And so for those folks, there's not a whole lot of benefit from a bill like this. What really happens is just whatever taxes flood the zone to replace these lost revenues, that's going to be what you end up seeing later. Bigger sales tax bill, potentially over 10% sales tax in some cases if we replace all these revenues. And again, don't let 20 years of keep chopping fool you, Georgia. 20 years of keep chopping is narrative cover for the fact that you're struggling and they want you to give up hope. They want you to believe that state government can't fill these holes, that state government can't make life better in all these ways. And I've heard so many complaints about state agencies not calling you back with enough time. They should be doing better customer service. What a trick that is to underfund a state agency and then say they're not working hard enough. Come on, Georgia's smarter than this. I mean, that's the thing that gets me is these politics of tax cuts, throwing you red meat, telling you that's how you solve affordability. That era is over. Anything else?
No further questions.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 37th to speak to the measure.